Alrighty then, hey guys, what's up? It is Sism here, and it is time to get into some leather working. The next part of the Manticore armor that we are going to be making is going to be the braces. Now, this is going to be a pretty long video, so let's get into it. So to make the prototypes for the van braces, I don't like to use either paper or cloth for leather prototypes. What I use is this. This is flooring foam. I got this whole big roll from Bunnings for about 20 bucks. It's very thin. It has a slight amount of give to it. But for prototyping leather, it's helpful because it moves in the same way and it reacts to stresses and forces in the same way. So, and in addition to that, it's incredibly cheap and it's very easy to work with. It will tear incredibly easily. And because it's so cheap, I don't feel quite so bad about throwing parts of it away. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to create a template for the van braces that we are going to make. So we're going to take this and we're going to wind up with a finished product, something like such. Again, with the Manticore armor, the seams are on a weird side, which is why this is an unusual pattern. But basically this is going to go around the forearm thus. It will have buckles on the back. So to create something like this, you only need 3 measurements from your arm. You need one from near the wrist, one near the back, and then the distance between the two. So obviously I've already done this, but we'll run through it again. So part of what I like about working with this foam is how quick it is to work with. Once you've got your measurements, we'll use the imperial side of this just because it happens to be convenient for my arm. About 7 inches around towards the back of my arm, about 11, but I'm going to push it out to 12 because like I said, there's a little bit of space in the back, and when you move your forearm, it changes dimensions. Duh, that is how muscles work. The important thing is, and I learned this from making the forearms for the Earth Sign armor, this distance is very important. If you get it too long, you will wind up with a very rigid piece in between your bicep and your wrist, and you won't be able to raise your arm properly. So the distance that I'm going to go for there, I'm going to raise my arm, I'm going to measure the distance as it is raised, and again I can see that between my wrist and my bicep, that's about 7 inches. So that's what I'm going to work with. After I've cut this out, again, very rough shape, I can test that it works by simply wrapping it around my arm. It's a little bit awkward, obviously, not being able to use one of your hands, but as you can see, meets up nicely there, meets up reasonably nicely there, is of the correct length for me to be able to move my arm around. That's a bit short. I could do with a longer edge on that. And so to get the seam on the other end, we're just going to take this pattern and we're just going to transpose it onto here and reverse it. I'll show you what I mean. So I'm just going to hold it up there, again to trial fit. I can see that when I extend my arm all the way up, there's still room for my wrist. I might shorten this a little bit because that is starting to get quite cozy. Not that I'm going to be doing that kind of the hand motion all the time, but you want the freedom of movement. And again, the buckles that are on the wrong side, when we put them on here, there's room to fit 2 or 3 fingers down there, just like in the game, and that's going to close nice and neatly down the bottom where it's basically going to be held tight. So the next step is to take our pattern here, lay it out on some leather, and then get cutting. So when it comes to cutting the leather, what we're going to need is the knife, duh. What I'll be using is a Stanley knife, or if you are American, you might call it a utility knife. The most important thing, of course, is having a fresh blade. I've got my cutting surface. We've got our leather. For the van braces, we're going to be using 4mm, or I believe 10 ounces. You could go thicker, but this isn't really going to be a combat piece, and 4mm is going to hold its shape extremely well once we wet form it. So basically all that's left to do now is use our marking implements to transfer the pattern from our foam over to the leather. Nice little tip. I like to mark my Stanley knife blades so that I know which ones are fresh and which ones have been in the knife previously. Now, I'm cutting it this way for a couple of reasons. Reason the first that I'm being so flippant and just kind of freehanding this is that this isn't a hero edge. This one's just on the wrist, and all of the presenting edges along these van braces are going to have edging along them quite similar to the Ursine arm that I made. So the edge doesn't ever get seen. It's going to be covered by the time that I finish making this, so I'm not too worried about it. That's also the reason that I'm not wetting this before I cut it. If this were a hero edge that needed to be presented and needed to look immaculate rather than worn, which is another story, then I would make sure to get the right level of moisture in the leather as well as having a brand new blade so that I could cut through it in one go. Because when you take more than one go to cut through it, I'll see if we can get it to show on the camera. You can see it better here. You wind up with several lines through it, which is not neat and tidy. You end up with little relics like this. Basically just introduced mess that isn't there if you can cut it through in one smooth go. However, none of that is important for this particular piece, so I'm not attempting that. But normally you would worry a lot more about how the edge is going to turn out, getting it in one cut and making sure that it's got the correct moisture level. But just because I'm barely going to be using a quarter of what I've got here, I don't like unnecessarily getting a watermark on it, because when you wet part of the piece, it will have a stain where the waterline got up to. You can't get rid of that. And I don't know what I want to do with the rest of this yet, so if there's no need to wet it like that, then I'm not going to. I know, all of you professional hot shit leather workers are looking at me and saying, why is he using a utility knife for a complex curve that has a concavity in it? And I know I should be able to use the proper weird little Japanese knife that you push with your thumb, but I don't have one and I don't know how to use it even if I did. So this is serviceable. We'll do a quick little test fit. Again, it's going to buckle up on the outside. So if I fold it around my arm thus, that's not bad at all. I'll make sure that the inner part is here so that again I can flex my arm all the way up. And that's a little tight. So I'm going to take 5mm off of this line, shore the whole thing up. So for the dyeing step, it's fairly important to make sure that the leather has a decent level of moisture in it. Here you can see I'm just spreading it around with a sponge to get a nice even coat. You can use a spray bottle for this if you want. Once I've gotten the water in there, I'm using a cotton dauber to go and spread the colour around on the piece. So this does it in very small increments, but with the Feeblings Pro Dye Black that I'm using, you get really awesome coverage. And the way that this armor looks in game, you can see a blue tone coming through it pretty strongly as opposed to the fairly strong brown tones that are coming through the gloves and the vest. So I did kind of just want to see how it would go with just a single coat. That way it wouldn't be too much of a super inky dark black. You'd have a bit of that undertone coming through and play the colours off of each other just to prevent all of the dark colours from running together. Because this armour does have a fairly dark colour palette apart from the white shirt. So this is a good way to keep all of the blacks and dark browns and all of that separate and keep them keep it visually interesting. Here I'm just going over the inside as well. You use up way more dye going over the inside because it's a lot more porous, but the inside is visible, so I do actually need to go over this. It's a pain in the ass. And also, just for a change, you can see that I'm using a proper drop sheet and proper PPE. I've gotten a little bit sick of the disposable gloves, so I'm going to be getting a set of rubber gloves just so that I'm not throwing out a bunch of plastic every time I want to put dye on something. You know, just trying to be a little bit mindful that way. But once the dye is on these, you can just leave them to dry and come back to them and treat them once they are ready. So the next step is to take our pieces, just measure completely around the edges. Even the edges that are buckled will have a little cap of, I'm going to be using kangaroo skin. If you're in a country where that is hard to come by, I'm sure that you can find like a nice thin garment leather. I'm going to be using it because it's very thin, it's very supple, it's incredibly easy to work with and stitch on. I've had good results with it previously. We're just going to measure the strips that we need for both of these and start cutting. So to glue this, I'm just going to be using my Leathercraft cement. So we've got all of the strips cut out. The way that we're going to be doing it is that each of these strips are 30 mil wide. I'm going to have about 10 mil on the front and wrap it around. So it's going to be longer on the back so that when I strike it through from the top with the pricking iron, it's 100% going to go through both layers of roux leather and the middle piece, and I'll be able to effectively stitch it together. So what I've done is I've cut separate strips for each of the straight edges, for the curved part near the wrist, and for the curved part that's going to go near the elbow. So basically all that is left to do is glue it on. Should probably make sure that I do this right when I am on camera doing it. Just going to give it a good shake, get it absolutely fucking everywhere. Now, I'll be honest with you here, dear viewer, I've put way too much on here. I'm just going to smooth it. What I'll do is, I'll get one of these pieces, and I've cut them 10 mil long on each end, so that I know that I'm going to have heaps of play. Normally I'd get precious about like which side of it I want showing, but nah. What you're looking for is for it to become tacky, not sticky. So I think that is going to be about good. I'm not going to be too precious about the measurement. I'm only going to be rough with it. That's about 10 mil at that end. That's about 9 mil in the middle. Let's just shuffle that over.
Oh, I'm not going to be too precious with it. 1 millimeter out, better fix that.
Shut up, Grant, you idiot. And at this end, we want to make sure... Yep. So you can see that's already starting to hold it. I'm having to apply quite a bit of pressure to move it laterally. So when I fold it over that wise, that is about 10 mil all the way along. Wonderful. So now we can flip it over. And on the obverse side, it is a bit of a simpler process now that they're just next to each other. There's some specialist tool for spreading this, but honestly a bit of cardboard, or I've got a bit of scrap leather here. Once you spread it and it dries a couple times on a bit of flat leather, it'll go about the consistency of a library card and really be an excellent applicator. So don't throw your little bits of scrap away immediately. They may have use yet. That's about ready now, honestly. Because this is quite thick, I'm just going to fold it over and push the edge down before I flip it. Sort of use the weight of it in an effort to flatten. And that, nearly laid it down in that glue. And that is a pretty good result. When they're folded around, you will be able to see the back of them because it does gape at the elbow a little bit, so that's why I made it black. I'm just going to cut this bit from the video. Why am I saying this out loud? This is dumb. Marvelous. So now that the glue is dry comes the stitching part. So what we're going to need to do is first of all punch a series of holes all the way along the edge. The reason for that is leather needles are blunt, so the holes need to be punched beforehand, especially for thick leather. So we are going to use a little punch here. The spacing on this one is 4mm. One's just whatever works best for you. I'm going to be using a cheap bamboo cutting board from Coles that, as you can see, I've already decorated previously, and I'm going to use a maul. We should have done this last night when it still had that moisture content from when I dyed it. It's dried out since then. It's very hot here in Australia at the moment. My neighbours wouldn't have appreciated me bashing the shit out of a pricking iron all night. So let's get into it. So now that we've finished putting all of the holes around it, nice and evenly spaced, it is time to do the stitching part. The way that I'm going to be doing it, I'm using a saddle horse. I've just basically gotten as much thread as the span of my arms. It's very important that when you're stitching, to get good, neat stitches in leather, you just want to iterate the same thing over and again. If this is something that you're looking to get into, again, the most important thing is find something comfortable for you, because you're going to be doing it a fucking lot. Each of these things are only 4mm apart and it just takes forever. Alright, so now we are up to the point where we are going to be wet forming. So what I've got here is a bucket of warm water, some towel ready to go. I've also got a form, so I want this to fit around my forearm, and this bottle is actually almost the exact dimensions. I'm going to be using this as a form. What that means is I'll just be wrapping that leather around it. I've got some towel and some rope. I'm going to have limited time that I'm able to perform the operations. So the first step is putting it in the water. Let's get underway. That will just sit there until it's dry. When it's dry, it'll hold whatever shape you've put it in. That is going to be roughly the shape that I'm after. And I'm just going to leave it propped up against the wall like this. Yeah, I'm just going to leave that till it dries. We'll do the second one. I'm not going to do the second one until this is dry because I don't have another bottle that shape. So the next thing that we need to make is the buckles. Now, I've got my hardware here. I bought in a couple of sizes. These are 20 mil. So basically I want them to be roughly this shape. And when I say roughly, I do mean exactly. So what I'm going to do is use this as something of a template. We're going to get our leather out. Now this, as you can see, we've got marks in it. We've got stains on it. You know, the edge is shit. But because this is such a tiny piece, I'll definitely be able to get one there. You know, we'll be able to get a few here. But basically this is about 100 mil long, 20 mil wide, and then we're 40 mil across the diagonals on this square. Wipe this down. That's about as much moisture as I'm going to want to take it. Try and hook the edge in there and basically just run it along. This is more difficult to do with more supple leather. If the leather is very stiff, you don't need to worry about holding it down. But you'll notice I'm applying a fair amount of pressure with my fingers here. I'm just going to try and take this corner. Yeah, that's all right. Hey guys, it's VoiceOver Grant here again. So what we're doing in this step is called beveling. We're just using this tool to peel the edge corners off of the leather. This is so that when I burnish it, it doesn't mushroom out and become a weird ugly shape that isn't going to fit through the buckle very well. This is me being pretty precious about it. This step isn't necessary. If you want to skip it, feel free. As you can see, the wet forming turned out pretty well. Good shape, fits well, a lot of movement there. It's not restricting me in any way. We're ready to condition. The traditional way to seal leather would be with neat's foot oil. I also have some leather conditioner. Now, obviously there are a lot of other options. These are just what I have to hand, and I wasn't sure which one was going to be more suitable, and so I ran a test. Yeah, this way around. I marked it on the back so that I wouldn't forget, because I'm very clever. So this is a good idea when you have options like this. Basically, do a test piece and see how it's going to pan out. This is another reason that it's a good idea to hang on to scraps. You know, don't just go throwing shit away willy-nilly. It'll come in handy. Why am I saying this? This piece is going to be edited out. Hang on, is this sharp? Yeah. To my eye, the leather conditioner has a cooler tone than the neat's foot oil, which warms it up a little bit and makes it a little bit darker. But I definitely want to use the oakwood leather conditioner here, so that is what we will be doing. The way that we're going to apply the leather conditioner is just with a rag here. I think this used to be a bed sheet or something. That's lovely. So you can see a bit of a difference right away. So we've dyed, conditioned and burnished the edges on all of our straps off screen. So what I'm doing now is adding the buckles onto these. I played around with the distances before, so basically all we're going to do is fold them so that the distance here going to the middle of the buckle is correct for where I want it to sit on the bracer. I'm sure there's a better way to do this, but I don't own the appropriate punch, so I'm just going to, keeping it folded, punch twice, because then that will give me a channel in the middle of it. We're going to be able to slip this over, and I can see now that is giving enough of a channel for the clasp to move up and down. I'm just going to give it a quick trim. There we go. A little bit of the old Leathercraft cement. If we pinch that, that will bind almost instantly. I'm going to hold it there and make sure that yes, that is where I want it to be. Yep, that opens nicely. So we'll leave these to dry. Once these are dry, I'll just poke 3 holes through with an awl, just run a couple stitches around and tie it off. So as you can see, the final steps here were done making use of my little cordless drill and a lump of wood that I could use to put a little bit of pressure on when I was drilling through it. So I've basically just eyeballed this grid as closely as I can for the size of my studs and the spacing from the game. With 4mm thick leather, you've definitely got enough structure to support you drilling into it. Definitely do have a bit of wood behind it though. I've seen so many people put a drill bit right through their fingers. I did this for the rivet holes in the buckles as well. And then I just used the bit of wood as a backing for the rivet anvil. All the spikes are Chicago screws, so they came with a little Phillips head screw to put in the back of them. Unfortunately, the Phillips head screw they came with was meant for garment weight leather, was meant for leather jackets or for putting into gloves or Converse All-Stars or various other such garments that people like to put big heavy metal spikes into. Now, this leather is 4mm thick. That presented several challenges that I'm going to complain about now because I have the microphone and you don't. These things came from America. I had to search low and high to find these. These came from studsandspikes.com. And coming from America, they used the imperial system to size the thread for them. Now, normally that's not too much of a problem, but these were some really, really stupid measurement, like 7/16 or something, that like Australia is one of those dumb countries where we use both imperial and metric, but do you think I could find these fucking screws anywhere in my local hardware store? So anyway, I did have to order some longer stainless screws to go in the back of them, but I think you'll agree with me, the end result, pretty well worth the trouble. Done. So I thought that for the final reveal I would put the shirt on as well, just for a bit of fun, make sure it all fits, and they fit beautifully. So again, they buckle up down the outside. There's a lot of movement in these. I can easily reach behind my back, I can do up my hair, I can dress and undress myself. With these on, it'll be super easy when I'm at a fair or at a con. I can sit down and eat without taking these parts off. So the cuffs on the glove are going to cover up to about here, hopefully. So yeah, the wrist mobility is super important. I'm able to hold my sword properly. Not that I actually know how to use one of these things, but I can do that one thing that every cosplayer knows how to do. There's enough movement in my wrist that I'm able to, you know, actually do some proper poses with this rather than just hold it menacingly. So, I'm very pleased with the end result. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned. We'll have more videos coming out at some point in the future. If this is your first time here, please feel free to stop by. I did a video on how I made this shirt, and also a couple of vlogs about how difficult my life is being someone who makes costumes from video games for fun. So, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.